Welcome to Training for Volunteer Income Tax Assistance, also known as VITA. Session 10. In this session, we will cover the Schedule CA 540. The training is presented by the Franchise Tax Board's VITA trainers. Hi, I'm Shantae.
I'm Christina. The Franchise Tax Board is proud to offer this series of training videos. This is the 10th of 11 sessions and the third of our four-part discussion about California income tax returns. If you have questions, please contact your local VITA coordinator, but feel free to reach out to FTB's VITA team at 800-522-5665 or by email at volunteercoordinator@ftb.ca.gov. Thanks for watching.
Let's get started. In this session, we will cover FTB's new Schedule CA 540. First, let's cover some background. Remember, federal tax reform signed into law in late 2017 did not change California income tax law. In fact, California income tax law conforms to the federal law as of January 1st, 2015. As a result, there continue to be differences between California and federal law. When it comes to doing California income tax returns, you will use the Schedule CA 540 to make adjustments to your federal AGI and to your federal itemized deductions using California law. In TaxSlayer, once you have filled out the federal section under itemized deductions, the information should flow directly to the California Return 540. If the taxpayer's itemized deductions are higher than the standard deduction for California, TaxSlayer will automatically create a Schedule CA 540 for you. As of November 2018, when this training session was being recorded, the 2018 California return was not yet available in TaxSlayer. Therefore, at this time, we are not aware of any manual inputs that need to be made when completing California returns. For the latest info about any possible adjustments, check with your local VITA coordinator for any updates regarding the California return in TaxSlayer. With that said, in this session, we will explain the Schedule CA 540 line by line for better understanding of the differences between federal and California law.
Now let's take a close look at the Schedule CA 540. We're going to go line by line for a better understanding of the differences between federal and California law. Part 1, Income Adjustment Schedule. Section A, Income from Federal Form 1040, Column A. On lines 1 through 5 of your Schedule CA 540, you will enter the same amounts you entered on your Federal Return 1040, lines 1 through line 5B. This information should automatically flow to California Schedule CA 540 from the entries you made in the Federal section of TaxSlayer. Section B, Additions to Income from Federal Schedule 1, Form 1040. On the Schedule CA 540, lines 10 through line 21, enter the same amounts you entered on your Federal Return Schedule 1 1040. This should also automatically flow to the California Schedule CA 540 from the entries made in the Federal section of TaxSlayer. For line 22, enter the total amount in column A, lines 1 through 21. Section C, Adjustments to Income from Federal Schedule 1, Form 1040. For lines 23 through 30 and lines 32 through 35, enter the same amount you entered on your Federal Return Schedule 1, 1040. Lines 34 and 35 show reserved on both the Schedule CA 540 and the Schedule 1, 1040 to allow for any additional tax changes that may come. Line 31A and 31B. On line 31A, enter the same amount entered on your Federal Return Schedule 1, 1040. For line 31B, enter the Social Security number and the last name of the individual to whom you paid alimony. Line 36, add lines 23 through line 31A and line 32 through line 35. Line 37 is your total. You will subtract line 36 from line 22. This should match your Federal 1040 line 7. This information should flow to the California Schedule CA 540 from the entries made in the Federal section of TaxSlayer. Schedule CA, Column B and Column C. These columns are used to enter subtractions and additions to the federal amounts shown in column A that are needed due to differences between federal and state law. Enter all amounts as positive numbers, unless advised otherwise in the instructions of the Schedule CA 540. You can use one of the following FTB publications to complete columns B and C. 1001 Supplemental Guidelines to California Adjustments, 1005 Pension and Annuity Guidelines, 1031 Guidelines for Determining Resident Status, 1032 Tax Information for Military Personnel, 1100 Taxation of Non-Residents and Individuals who Change Residency. For these forms and publications, go to ftb.ca.gov/forms.
Part 2, Adjustments to Federal Itemized Deductions. If you are taking the standard deduction on your federal return but itemized for California, you will first need to complete the Schedule A 1040. Make sure TaxSlayer has checked the box at the top of the Schedule CA 540, Part 2, and lines 1 through 30 are completed. TaxSlayer should transfer this information automatically from what was entered in the federal section. Now we will cover lines 1 through 30 of the Schedule CA 540 Part 2. Medical and dental expenses. For lines 1 through 16, which include medical and dental expenses, taxes paid, interest paid, gifts to charity, casualty and theft losses, and other itemized deductions, enter the same amount entered on your federal return Schedule A 1040. Lines 1 through 4 conform to federal. Therefore, no adjustment is needed. This information should automatically flow from the entries made in the federal section of TaxSlayer. We will now go over some of the differences between federal and state law, as well as where adjustments may need to be made. Under taxes paid, line 5A, California does not allow the following deduction: state and local tax, SDI, or state and local general sales tax. You will need to subtract this deduction out by entering the amount on line 5A in column B. Line 5E, federal limited the state and local tax, including property tax deduction, to $10,000. California does not conform to this limitation. If your deduction was limited on federal, you will need to make an adjustment in column C of line 5E for the amount over the federal limit. Under other taxes, line 6, California does not allow a deduction for foreign income. You will need to enter this amount on line 6, column B. This information should automatically flow from the entries made in the federal section of TaxSlayer.
Line 8. Federal has limited the allowable interest deduction to $750,000 mortgage loan amounts that incurred after December 15, 2017, and suspended the deduction on up to $100,000 loan amount for interest on home equity loans. California does not conform. California still allows you to deduct interest on up to $1 million mortgage loan amount and interest on home equity mortgage loans up to $100,000. If your deduction was limited on federal, you will need to make an adjustment in column C of line 8 for the amount over the federal limit. Line 9. Your federal and state deduction for investment interest may differ. Use FTB 3526 to figure out the amount to enter on line 9, column B or C. Gifts to charity. For lines 11 and 12, California does not conform to the new federal deduction up to 60% AGI. California limits your deduction to 50% of your federal AGI. You will need to enter the difference between federal and state law in column B, line 11 and 12. If you made a donation by cash or check, the adjustment would go on line 11, and donations made any other way, for example, a bag of clothes, the adjustment will be made on line 12. Line 13, carryovers. If you are carrying over a deduction made from the prior year and your state carryover is larger than your federal carryover, enter the difference in column C, line 13. Federal has suspended the personal casualty and theft loss deduction unless incurred in a federal declared disaster. California does not conform. To claim this loss, complete Federal Form 4684 using California amounts and enter the difference between the federal and state amount in column B or C of line 15.
For line 16, other itemized deductions, generally California law conforms to federal law and no adjustments are needed. However, for 2018, there are several differences. Refer to the Schedule CA 540 instructions for more detail. Here are a few common adjustments you will need to make. Unreimbursed impaired work-related expenses. Complete Federal Form 2106 for employee business expenses and enter the difference between federal and state law in columns B and C. Refer to the Schedule CA 540 instructions for additional information. Gambling losses are another adjustment that may need to be made. California does not allow California lottery losses as a deduction. You will need to enter the California lottery losses entered on line 16 column A on line 16 column B. To make this adjustment, you will need to go into the California return in tax layer under subtractions from income and make this entry. Job expenses and certain miscellaneous deductions. Federal has suspended the deduction for miscellaneous itemized deductions subject to the 2% floor, which means anything over 2% of your AGI. Line 19 through 21, California does not conform. Remember, this does not include the unreimbursed impaired related work expenses. Line 19, unreimbursed employee expenses. California does not conform to the suspension of this deduction. This includes union dues, job travel expenses, job education, etc. You will complete Form 2106 using California law. For additional information, refer to the Schedule CA 540 instructions. Line 20, tax preparation fees. Enter the fees you paid for tax preparation, including fees paid for filing electronically. Debit and credit card payment convenient fees should be entered on line 21 instead of line 20. Line 21, other expenses. You will enter the total amount paid to generate or collect taxable income. For example, investment expenses, safe deposit box, etc. For more information, refer to Schedule CA 540 instructions.
Line 27, other adjustments. Please refer to the Schedule CA 540 instructions for more information, since this is where you will put less common deductions such as adoption-related expenses, mortgage interest credit, and non-taxable income expenses. These are other allowed expenses not subject to the 2% floor. Line 29, California itemized deductions. This is where you will determine if your federal AGI from Form 540, line 13 is more than the following based on your filing status. Single or married RDP filing separately, $194,504. Head of household, $291,760. Married RDP filing jointly, $389,013. If it is not, transfer the amount on line 28 of your Schedule CA 540 to line 29. If it is, complete the itemized deduction worksheet located in the instructions of the Schedule CA 540, line 29. This information should automatically flow from the entries made in the federal section of tax layer. Line 30, amount from line 29 or standard deduction. You will enter the larger of line 29 or your standard deduction. Single or married RDP filing separately is $4,401, or married RDP filing jointly, head of household, or qualifying widower is $8,802. Then you will transfer line 30 to Form 540, line 18. This information should automatically flow from the entries made in the federal section of tax layer. At this point, you are now done with your California Schedule CA 540.
You have now completed the 10th of 11 volunteer income tax assistance training sessions. All sessions are available at the Franchise Tax Board's website at ftb.ca.gov. If you have questions, please contact your local VITA coordinator, but feel free to reach out to the FTB's VITA team at 800-522-5665 or by email at volunteercoordinator@ftb.ca.gov. Keep practicing, and thanks for watching.